And I bet you all came here thinking, I hope we talk about Bhava, Jati, and Janapana tonight. So those are the Pali terms because we were trying to keep it a little mysterious. We're talking about existence. That's the Bhava. Birth, Jati. And then there's one term for old age and death, Jara Maranya. And we've been talking for off and on quite some time, but technically I think there's 10 weeks of us talking about causation and the Buddhist concept of causation. And what do we mean by causation? And it is literally what the Buddha was considering, contemplating when he woke up to reality, when he did what we call became enlightened. And the question was a pretty basic one. There is suffering. Why? What causes suffering? And he found this chain that Maddie has been kind enough to write down on the board.
I did my best.
And starting with ignorance all the way down to what we're going to end with tonight, which is aging and death. But this is not causation in the sense that we typically think about it here. We've taken the concept of causation and have gotten locked in, actually because of some ancient Greeks, into a very narrow idea of what's causation. And that is A leads to B, B leads to C, right? So particle A hits particle B, or I shove Maddie and she shoves me back, that sort of causation. And usually we think of causation as happening chronologically, as in time. A always happens before B, B always happens for C. And we get locked into this, even though literally for 100 years now we've known that time and causation are marginally related, but that your concept of time is not my concept of time. And that literally for one person, event A can happen before B, and for a different person, event B can happen before A. So science has shown that this idea of causation is actually wrong, but we still get stuck on it. But the Buddha did not speak of causation in the same sense. So for him, all of these arose together, that you couldn't have one without the other. So we think of effect as reliant on cause. If there's no cause, there's no effect, right? But that's not how the Buddha thought of this. Effect and cause arise together. If there's this, if this arises, this arises. If this arises, this arises. That's causation. Mm-hmm. Literally the words of the Buddha. If this, this. So this is something that's tough for us to sometimes grasp. Not because it's difficult, but because it's not how we typically think of it. So it causes us to have to think about it in a different way than we typically do. But it is central. It is the central teaching on what causes suffering and how we end it. In fact, we often talk about the Four Noble Truths as the basic truths of Buddhism. But the Four Noble Truths are just basically getting to the root of causation. You can find the Four Noble Truths in this concept of causation.
Mm-hmm. And if that all sounds a little intellectual for my heart people, the best illustration, for those of you, were any of you here for the first night that we started doing this? We started this series? And I read this book.
And
you're back. You're back, amazing. Well, I illustrated it with a very analytical document known as If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Has anybody read that little book? If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. He's going to want a napkin. And when you first start to read this book, you start to think, okay, it's like this chain of like, if this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. But if you read the book, spoiler alert, where does it end? Another glass of milk. Right? And so really you could say, okay, well, if you have the napkin, then like it can start anywhere on that chain. Does that make sense? Like that's kind of how my sweet little pea brain likes to think about this in the if you give a mouse a cookie context. Yeah.
Right. And in fact, the Buddha sometimes gives this teaching starting at the top through the bottom. Sometimes he started at the bottom and worked to the top. And literally, you can start in the middle and go either way you want. So it all kind of comes up together, and we can see it in that chain. The other way that often this is taught is that this happens as part of what's called the cycle of samsara, or rebirth, or however you want to think about, like you die and then you're born. And people have different theories about that. And whatever your theory is about it, that's fine. You're welcome here. Nobody's getting hung up on it. You can think of it however you want to as far as all of that. But it's very clear from the teachings as well as all of the folks that came after that this arising, this existence, birth, and death are not just a literal birth, death, rebirth. That this existence, birth, and death arise each moment. Moment after moment after moment. We exist, we're born, we get old, we die. This moment is born. This moment lives its moment. It passes away and another moment arises. Over and over and over again. So that's kind of what we're going to be exploring today.
Yeah, we're going to take a deeper look at each one of these things, kind of look at it big picture, day to day, and then we're going to talk about, that's great information, but what do you do with that, right? How do we practice with these things in order to have a better time in our existence, right? So, make sense? Are we psyched? Are we pumped? We excited about the chain of causation? Yeah!
Causation!
Whoa! Love it.
Awesome. And there's going to be some back and forth as we, I'll kind of give the description of this stuff, and then Maddie, with her sweetheart practice, will be jumping in and say, what do we actually do with all of this? So let's start with Bawa. And I'm sure I mispronounced that. But
also known as?
Existence, being, becoming. Okay. But it's not the same as birth. Kind of interesting.
But Roy, how can that be?
Order now, and we'll send you ginsu knives. How can that be? So, I think of this with a metaphor, as I do many things. So, back in the Middle Ages when I went to school, we only had so much stuff, and they hadn't really invented electronics, and so we found ways of entertaining ourselves. Sometimes it was throwing rocks at each other, and sometimes it was actually in school doing things. And one of the things that we did was paper mache. Did anybody else do that in school? Yeah, it was really interesting, and it was about the only craft that I could actually do that people wouldn't laugh at. And how we did it is they would give you a balloon, and they would give you newspaper and those scissors that you use as a kid so that you won't cut yourself. And then they would do, like plaster watered down, or, paste in water. And you blow up the balloon, and then you cut, strips of paper, you dip it in, and you put one over another. Anybody remember doing it? Oh, yes, and that thing, yes. Exactly, you know what I'm talking about. And so you just get air, right? And then you get this thin balloon that you can shape and squeeze and make into, a poodle if you're really talented or whatever. Balloons are flexible. And then you just take paper that's flexible And you put it in the liquid, and then you put it on, and what happens? It dries, it gets hard, and it sticks. And then you put on another strip, and another strip, and another strip. And what they taught us to do is actually you would have layer after layer after layer, and then you put it out and let it dry, and then we would get a needle and stick it through and pop the balloon on the inside, but the paper mache still held its shape, right? And what's on the inside of that paper mache? Air, right? It's the air out there that before I breathed it in and blew it into the balloon was just there. And this is how we become. The paper mache circle became. It was just air. And then we just put a layer of this. And what are these kinds of layers, to push my metaphor further? Well, before we ever go to school, we are told, okay, you're good at this or you're bad at this. And then you go to school and then you actually learn, like, okay, oh, I'm the dumbass, or I'm the good one, or I'm this, or I'm that, right? And every time you're told, oh, you're good at this, a layer of paper mache. Oh, you should try harder at this, another layer of paper. We're dipping it in that, and somebody is sometimes putting it on us, or we're putting it on ourselves. Okay. But we build up layer after layer of being told what we are. And this is the paper mache of becoming. When you're done, you've become something that you never were. You were open air, free, loose, and you become constricted. And so we can think about this like, I remember having a friend, maybe 10 years old, and we were both raised in very evangelical, fundamentalist kinds of churches. Both of our parents were pastors. And I was told, oh, you're the good kid. My family, more people went to prison than to college. And so I was one of the ones who was going to go to college. I was one of the ones who wasn't going to go to prison. Her parents told her, and made it very clear, and even I knew this, they considered her promiscuous. This was the early 70s, so that's kind of what you had. You had promiscuous kids. She was just another kid to me. Like, I didn't even know what it meant. But she very clearly learned what it meant. And she became the promiscuous one. Unfair, nothing to do with her, but she became the promiscuous one. I became the good one. I had my prison, she had hers. Right? They're both prisons. They're both that paper mache locking us into something that is not our true nature. That is Bhawa. That is existence. It arises in a way before we're even born. It's something we're born into because each moment we exhibit that becoming. So our inheritance, our true nature is freedom to be whatever. And each moment we are conditioned to think, oh, actually, I'm the one who does this. And then we act that out. I'm the one who is. You maybe just take a moment, close your eyes, and picture yourself with your family. Or if it's easier, picture it with your friends. And you're just sitting around and complete this sentence. I'm the one who. Does something come to mind? I'm the one who. You're the one that's this. And what would it be like to not be the one that's that? Is it scary? Is it freeing? Is it both? There's a lot of things that lock us into this becoming. They're just the tendencies that arise with being human, with being conditioned. So it creates a division within us. We make two selves. We make the self that is actually walking around in the world as it is, and then there's the image of the self that becomes. There's the me that's just here, and then there's the me that says, oh, I'm a facilitator. Right? And you buy in too. You come here, you listen to me. I mean, if I wasn't the facilitator, would you be quiet this long? Probably not. You might for Maddie. But, so we take on these roles. And they have some value, right? We can't just, if I go to work, I'm the one who does this job. People pay me to show up and do it. So so it can be useful to become. Okay, it's not all wrong. There are times when becoming is needed, but not on the cushion, not with Sangha, not when you can see that it becomes counterproductive, when you're the fuck up in the family and you don't want to be that anymore, or you're the good one in the family and you want somebody else to take on that burden. So we have the freedom to become, or can we find some freedom not to become that? Maybe we could talk about some of working with
So what do we do with that? Right? Like, great information. What the heck do we do with that? And so, why... It's really interesting. I was reading the actual sutta where this came from, and I was so pumped to get some, sink my teeth in. Okay, what did the Buddha say about this? And I'm going to read you part of this. All right, existence. Are you ready? Yeah? Okay. And this is the Buddha talking to his attendant, Ananda. So when you hear me say Ananda, that's who it is. It was said, with clinging as condition, there is existence. So we're going from clinging to existence, right? How is that so, Ananda? Should be understood this way. If there were absolutely and utterly no clinging of any kind anywhere, that is, no clinging to sense pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to precepts and observances, or clinging to a doctrine of self, then, in the complete absence of clinging with a sensation of clinging, would existence be discerned? Certainly not, Venerable Sir. Therefore, Nanda, this is the cause, source, origin, and condition for existence, namely clinging. Okay, for me, I'm going to be maybe unpopular opinion, that was deeply unsatisfying. I was like, can you give me just a little bit more? What do I do with this? And essentially, it just feels like the Buddha's being like, hey, you know how this thing is the thing? And Ananda goes, yeah, cool. There's just not a ton to it. So when you're thinking of, I was hoping that there were some clear laid out instructions. How do we work with this? And it goes back to that whole kind of what I was saying earlier, a lot of it is see for yourself. So, what might work for me within working with this may be useful for you, may not. So that's my little disclaimer. Pretty much every time we talk about something that can be intellectualized at this level, I want to just remind you to take what resonates and leave the rest. You don't need to memorize it. And if the practices I offer are helpful for you, great. If they're not, no big deal. Keep coming back. We're glad you're here. So we're talking about becoming as the concept, right? As the things that people put on us. You've heard the term, if you've been here a while, causes and conditions. Y'all heard us say that before? It's the causes and conditions that make up who Maddie is, right? I'm an only child. You know, I'm a singer-songwriter. And there's good things about that, right? Like if my mom didn't notice that I was gifted at music and kind of pushed that on me at a young age, I probably wouldn't be a musician. And that's a gift I have, right? So how do we hold both of these things? How do we hold the things that are useful and the things that are not? And the practice for me with this is equanimity. Right? It's finding the middleness of it. So equanimity practice is a heart practice known as upekkha, fancy word, just the Pali word or the language of the Buddha. And the way we actually practice this, like on the cushion, off the cushion. On the cushion, it's a series of phrases, right? And equanimity, in my opinion, is really just learning to be with what is true in the moment, right? Not leaning into the causes and conditions, because when we lean into the causes and conditions, it starts to turn into action. I'm sure y'all have heard that like quote that like, what the thoughts become the habits, and the habits become the behaviors, and all that. I'm sure most of us have heard that. It's kind of if we start with equanimity, we tend to sort through what's useful and what's not useful a little bit clearer. At least I do. And so when we're sitting on the cushion, the way that I practice equanimity on the cushion, you know how we practice with our breath just now, like we were focusing on the breath, that was our anchor. Well, for equanimity, we use phrases. And my phrase that helps me the most is, right now it's like this. Right now it's like this. So I sit on the cushion and I just, over and over, right now it's like this. Sometimes I'll throw in, may I be exactly where I am with tact and equanimity. Sometimes I say, can I just be a 5 today? Like, can I just be right smack dab in the middle? So those are some ideas, but the one phrase that has helped me the most is just, right now it's like this. And learning to be present with that moment, and with others too. Because how many of us have friends, family that continue to try and like paper mache us all day long, right? And then all of a sudden we're starting to paper mache ourselves, right? Like I've been the fuck up, right? I've been told I'm the fuck up, and so I reinforce that idea over and over, and before you know it, I've put on enough paper mache myself, and here we are. And so equanimity also helps us realize what's ours and what is not, right? What is of our own doing, what is wholesome for us, what is not. It's just a good spot day to day to be. And so practicing equanimity off the cushion is pretty similar to practicing it on, right? Just appearing in this moment right now as we are here. What do we know to be true? Really true. What do we know to be the reality of this moment? Without leaning in to the causes and conditions. So equanimity is a lot of curiosity, and it's a lot of space for me. It's a lot of being willing to not know. And that can be really scary, because sometimes what we're told of who we are, in my opinion at least, is a lot easier to cling to that and to act on that than it is to not know. So, yeah, equanimity is a badass practice, very helpful if you see yourself starting to spin into this link of becoming. Because when we lean into becoming, it takes us into
birth.
Hey,
yeah.
Segue.
Yeah, and let me kind of, if I can't circle back on that too, because I think the quote you gave is really good, because it points out how that clinging leads to the existence. And so your equanimity practice for me is one where I see the clinging come up. Mm-hmm. You know, I see where that paste is in there that wants to grab onto the balloon or the paper underneath it. And if I can just let go of that a little bit and not cling quite so much, mm-hmm. you know, with that equanimity of, okay. Or maybe I don't even feel very balanced right now. Can I have equanimity around my lack of equanimity? You know? So, were it not for existence, birth wouldn't arise. And in a sense, this is sort of obvious. If nothing existed, we wouldn't be born. But we also have this, like, the literal birth, old age, death that we all experience. And let's take a moment to talk about that. Because normally we think of birth, oh boy, fresh baby.
Fresh baby.
Right? Who doesn't love a baby, right? As long as you're not having to change it. Yeah, they're wonderful. And birth is good. And old age and death sucks, right? And this teaching, it's that right in birth is the beginning of old age. It begins the process. And birth does not lead to old age and death any more than old age and death require birth, that they arise together. And so in Buddhism, we don't see birth as inherently good and old age and death as inherently bad. We see them as connected, deeply connected, one process. Old age, death, birth. Two sides of one coin. And so we can think of this birth, old age, death, and then rebirth of a new life in a literal sense, but also the teaching is very clear, as I said before, that with becoming, there is a birth of us, right? So we become whatever it is we become. We become the good person or the bad person, or the singer-songwriter or the doctor or the lawyer, whatever it might be. And then we birth that in this moment. I act like the singer-songwriter or the lawyer. I act like the barista. Becoming arises with the birth of that. Birth arises with the becoming of it. They happen so quickly we don't even notice them. I become it, I do it. And then it gets old. How many cups of coffee as a barista do you have to pour before it gets old? And then at some point, we don't get to do it anymore. At some point, your vocals will give out. At some point, I will write my last contract, and the world will probably be better for it. But at some point, we stop doing what we do. And even in this moment, we can only do a thing for a split second. And then the next moment arises, and the next, and the next. I read one word, and then the next, and then the next. You sing one note, and then the next, and the next. And so we become that note, we become that next thing, and then that passes away, and the next arises. If we have clinging, and we hang on to the last one, we become it. We become this thing, this person, this barista, this singer-songwriter, whatever it might be. And we carry forward that image of it. Whereas the reality is that's already passed. Right? This moment I'm a facilitator. That moment just passed. And then I take it up again, and again, and again, and again. And then it gets old, it passes away, but I still cling to it, I become. It's born, it gets old, it dies. I cling, it arises again. This is the cycle. This is samsara, moment by moment by moment. It's the mental phenomena, the formation of ideas, and it's the entire chain. Something's good, something's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, leads to the next thing, to the next thing. I think of a bird. I hear a song, bird. Cling to it. Oh, I know what that is. The chirping is already gone, and I'm thinking bird. Right? Can we be present in this moment with just this chirp? Not even required to label it. Just chirp. This is intimacy with this moment. Intimacy with this reality, rather than becoming connected with it. So how do we work with that?
So what do we do with that? Again, great information, but what do we do? I could pick up the sutta again, but it would say the same exact thing, but just changed a couple words, right? So again, I was looking for very strict guidance on what to do here, but I think it really does show up. So one thing I want to touch on too is, why do we keep picking it up, right? So like the singer-songwriter thing, let's start there. I keep choosing to pick up singer-songwriter, right? The birth of that singer-songwriter. But why do we keep picking it up, right? And it's because we're trying to find fulfillment. We're trying to find happiness, right? So samsara is this cycle that we're all kind of here stuck in, where we just feel that happiness is right around the corner, right? And so for me, it's been a pretty rough road realizing that those things are never going to actually fulfill me. So the singer-songwriter is never going to actually make me lasting happy, because it's here and it's gone. It's gone. It's gone. You have to keep picking it up. And I'm assuming you're all here because you're like looking for some happiness, looking for some relief. I know that's why I showed up. I know that's why I tried meditation, because somebody told me it would help me feel less shitty. Straight up. And there's I think Paniwadi, Mikey's teacher, says, if your happiness is not of this world, the world cannot take it away. Just some food for thought with that. But, practicing with this is, in my opinion, it's pretty simple, for lack of a better word. Because I think it is mindfulness. It's being present to each moment. It's like what we did when we sat, watching the breath, watching it go, coming back. This brings our capacity to be with what is. I don't know, you've heard the Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there's a space, right? And so, in my opinion, mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness just makes that space a lot bigger. And so when we practice mindfulness, when we practice sitting on the cushion and breathing and falling away and breathing and falling away, when we get out into the real world, we have a little bit more space in between the person who cuts us off in traffic and the middle finger, right? And so we have almost have a choice, right? We have a choice whether to allow these causes and conditions, the singer-songwriter, the fuck up. We have a choice whether to lean into those causes and conditions and act on them, or to simply be present and to choose wisely. Is this what I want to do in this moment? And I'll offer kind of a short example of how this shows up in my day-to-day life, or how it has shown up in my practice. So how many of you are singer-songwriter, artist of any kind, right? So some folks, you've done music, or how many of you are like, identify with your career? That's probably a better thing. Does anybody identify with the job they do? Like some people, or like the fact that you're like a mother or a partner. You've probably got something you do that folks, because you know when people ask, what do you do? You got whatever that answer is, that's what we're talking about right here. Whatever that answer is. So for me, it was being a musician. And when I first started dating my now wife, I would go see, she's got all these college friends. Y'all, I like show up to these parties with her college friends and there's like 15 of them and they all know each other. And so it's like a situation where I'm already feeling a little anxious. So when we first started dating, my response to the stimulus was to just lean real hard into my causes and conditions of being a musician. Y'all met a name dropper before? Right here. Right here. Right? So I'd lean into the name drop. I'd lean into the cool things I've done. I'd be like, oh yeah, Hozier watched me eat a hot dog once. It's cool, no big deal. You know, I'd lean into those things. And then I was sitting with my wife, my girlfriend at the time, and she called me on it. She said, Maddie, you like do this thing where you're almost like podcasting at me. Where you podcast at people. I'm like, oh. And then I started to watch. And I did. But what gave me the space to be able to watch? Practice. Right? And so now when I show up in these spaces, I know I don't need to lean into my causes and conditions that I've clung to for so long because they make me feel safe. Even if they're not wholesome, even if they're not helpful. Anybody who's ever gone through any sort of recovery or addiction knows exactly what I'm talking about. We can cling to that knowing it is not the best thing for us, knowing that it is not wholesome or helpful. And so if you're leaning into your causes and conditions and it's starting to cause some action, it's starting to cause some birth of some unwholesome things, whatever, just get your butt on the cushion. Work to practice how to elongate that space between the stimulus and the response. Get curious. Yeah, and that's just what's been helpful to me as I navigate it, but yeah.
So, stimulus and response. Right?
You gonna talk about entropy again?
No, I promise I won't. At least not this time. So, you know, I hear that quote a lot, and it actually, at least when I first heard it, bothered me on some level. Because when I would hear stimulus and response, what it said was all of this old, you know, evangelical conditioning. Well, that's where your free will exists. That's where your spirit exists. That's where all of this old crap that you've been trying to shake off exists. And I think for me and maybe for some others, that's where you're supposed to feel guilty. Right? I had a stimulus, I had a response, I flipped you off, but hey, there was this gap there. You made a choice. Feel bad. Shame, guilt, all of our fun stuff. Between stimulus and response is also where becoming can exist. It's where we can choose to create, I'm the good person, I'm the bad person, right? So in Buddhism, we turn that on its head. Between stimulus and response is where equanimity, where emptiness, where tranquility, where openness exists. Freedom not in the sense that I can choose to flip off or pray for you. Freedom in the sense of free. Like I can just be here and I don't have to become something. Does that make sense? So even the things that are intended to help us, we can cling to. And as soon as we cling to them, becoming pops up. Oh man, enlightenment is the stickiest damn thing ever. I mean, you can totally become all over awakening and meditation and look at me and oh man, I am so balanced. Ooh, check out my tranquility. Right? This rocks, yeah. Clinging up the wazoo, right? And so we remember death. We remember old age. In fact, man, this, I sometimes am shocked that any of us are Buddhists because this can be really dark sometimes. I mean, every day, for some of us, we practice the 5 remembrances. I'm of a nature to get old. I'm of a nature to get sick. I'm of a nature to die. Everything I cling to, everything I love, everything I hold on to will be gone one day. And I own my actions. I inherit my actions. I mean, this is not the feel-good, hang in there, baby, kind of posterized kind of stuff that we're typically doing. Old age, sickness, death, isn't that the bumper sticker that we've got out there?
Yep. Pick one up.
Yeah, grab one. But that's that space of freedom as well. That's that gap that we can remember, oh yeah. And so right in this moment, there's that freedom because I've acknowledged it. I don't have to run from any of this anymore. I can be right there in the middle of it. And right there in the middle of old age, sickness, death is freedom. And it seems backwards as hell. But if you want to experience suffering, pretend that death doesn't exist. If you really want to experience suffering, pretend that you're never going to get sick, you're never going to age. Get to my age and feeling the sore shoulder and all the crap that happens. Oh, that's not fair. That's not supposed to happen. I was supposed to feel like I'm 25 for the rest of my life. So, aging and death are not, forgive me, the death sentence. Actually, because there's an escape from them. And right in death, right in old age, right in birth, right in becoming, we can see that means of escape. So talk to us about that.
Oh, you weren't going to read the poem?
Oh, no.
No, okay.
Yes.
There was a poem. Something came to mind. I have this sticker of this. Well, I have a poster on my bathroom door that looks like it's like an old timey like 50s vacation poster, and it just says, "Relax, you'll be dead someday," which people come to my house and they react to it, and I realized, oh, this isn't normal to have this sort of Buddhist approach. But it really does offer some relief to me to remember that. And not in an apathetic, nothing matters way. And this is the practice for me. It's reflection. Not even just on old age and like, I'm gonna die. More about reflection on impermanence in general. If you were here on last Wednesday, you heard me talk about glazed pecans and how much I love them and how I want to make sure I have an unlimited supply of glazed pecans, because when they run out, it is unpleasant. See what I'm saying? Right? The impermanence is there. And so, yes, we can reflect on old age and we can reflect on death, but can we also reflect on noticing the pecans starting to run out. Like I made some at home. That's how bad I wanted them. I couldn't go to Buc-ee's, so I made them. And then my landlord was over this morning and ate the rest of them. And I watched as he picked up each one. And I watched it age. And then I watched him die. Right? And it's a silly thing, right? Glazed pecans. But do you see how this can turn into anything, really? Our control, our power, our adoration, our relationships, and on ourselves. So just reflecting and remembering that marks that things are impermanent. That's how I practice with this.
What's up, y'all? Reverend Mikey Noshel here from Wild Heart Meditation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks for checking us out. Do me a favor, please like and subscribe. And if you feel moved to leave a donation, you can do so at wildheartmeditationcenter.org or the Venmo link in the description. Peace and love.